My uncle mocked, "You think you're too good to clean up after us?" When I refused to bail him out of debt, then I quietly bought the company that held his contract and said, "Now you work for me." My uncle had spent years telling everyone in my family that I thought I was better than them. I never really understood where that came from because I was probably the least confrontational person at family gatherings. I worked, paid my bills, kept to myself, and tried not to get involved in everybody else's problems. That last part turned into a much bigger problem than I expected. It started when my uncle called me on a Tuesday afternoon asking for money. Not a small loan, not something like a few $100s to get through a rough week. He wanted $38,000. I actually thought he had made a mistake when he gave me the number. I was sitting at my desk at work, eating a sandwich I had brought from home, and I remember staring at my phone for a few seconds after he said it. My first thought was that maybe there had been an accident. His house was older, and he had mentioned plumbing problems a few months earlier. I asked what happened. He explained that his business had fallen behind on a major contract, and he needed to make a payment immediately or the company he worked under contract for was going to terminate the agreement. He said he only needed enough money to get through the next couple of weeks. He assured me he had work coming in. He said several customers owed him money and that once those invoices were paid, he would be fine. I asked whether the $38,000 included payroll. He said part of it did. That was the first detail that bothered me. My uncle owned a small commercial cleaning company. It was the kind of business that had a few trucks, a storage unit, several employees, and a lot of recurring contracts. He had started it years earlier after getting laid off from a warehouse job. At the time, everyone in the family was proud of him. He had built something from scratch. He did office cleaning, apartment turnovers, small medical buildings, and construction cleanup. The contract he was talking about was his biggest one. It covered several buildings managed by a national property services company. My uncle had been working under that contract for years. He had always bragged that the contract was what made his company legitimate. He called it his golden ticket. I asked why the property services company was threatening to terminate him. He said they were being unreasonable. He said one manager had complained about missed cleaning schedules, another had complained about supply shortages, and someone had accused his workers of leaving early. According to him, none of it was his fault. His employees were unreliable. His customers were impossible. His vendors were late. The economy was bad. Everybody was trying to squeeze him. He said he was being punished for having one bad month. I asked how much debt the company had. There was a pause. Then he said it was not my concern. That was when I realized the $38,000 was probably not temporary. I told him I could not give him that kind of money. I had savings, but most of it was tied up in a retirement account and a down payment fund. I had no intention of draining everything I had because my uncle needed a business rescue. I offered to look at his numbers with him. I even offered to help him prepare a payment plan for whoever he owed. He got offended almost immediately. He said I was acting like an accountant. I reminded him that he had asked me for almost $40,000. He said family was supposed to help family. I told him family helping family did not mean pretending debt did not exist. There was another pause. Then he said something that stuck with me. He said I had gotten too comfortable sitting behind a desk while other people actually worked for a living. I was surprised because I had never insulted his job. I told him that was not fair. He laughed. He said I should come spend a week cleaning up after his crews, and then maybe I would understand. I said I had nothing against cleaning work. I just did not think I should empty my savings to cover a business I did not own. He became more annoyed. Then he mocked me by saying I apparently thought I was too good to clean up after them. That was the sentence that turned a normal disagreement into something much more personal. I told him I was not judging anyone who cleaned buildings. I was refusing to finance a company without knowing whether it could survive. He hung up. I figured that would be the end of it. It was not. That evening, my mother called me. She said my uncle was furious. She said he felt embarrassed because I had made him feel like a failure. I told her I had never called him a failure. She said I needed to understand that he was under a lot of pressure. I asked whether she knew how much debt he had. She said she did not. I asked whether anyone in the family had actually seen his books. She said no. That answer bothered me more than anything else. People were asking me to rescue something none of us had looked at. Over the next week, I got several calls from relatives. One cousin said my uncle had told everyone I was arrogant. Another said I had plenty of money and was deliberately refusing to help. That was not true. I had around $52,000 in liquid savings. It had taken me years to build that. I still had a mortgage. I had car insurance, health insurance, utilities, and normal expenses. I was not rich. I was just careful. My uncle knew that, or at least I thought he did. A few days later, I saw him at my mother's house for dinner. He barely acknowledged me. My mother tried to keep the evening normal. We ate spaghetti and salad at the kitchen table. My uncle spent most of the meal checking his phone. At one point, he mentioned that one of his workers had quit. Nobody responded. Then he started talking about how difficult it was to find people willing to work hard. He said people wanted office jobs and comfortable chairs. I knew he was talking about me. I ignored it. After dinner, I helped my mother put plates in the dishwasher. My uncle walked into the kitchen and made another comment about people who thought they were too good to get their hands dirty. I asked him to leave me out of it. He told me I was making everything about myself. That was the moment I stopped trying to repair the relationship. I did not fight with him. I did not insult him. I simply decided I was done defending my character to someone who had already decided what he wanted to believe. For the next few weeks, I heard almost nothing directly from him. I found out things through other people. He borrowed $5,000 from my grandmother. He sold one of his work vans. He delayed paying 2 employees. One supplier stopped delivering chemicals until he paid an overdue balance. Then I received a text from one of my cousins asking whether I knew about the contract. I asked which contract. She said my uncle's biggest client was considering replacing him. I told her I knew he was having trouble, but I did not know the details. She said she had heard my uncle was behind on service requirements. That matched what he had told me, except he had made it sound like the problems were mostly unfair complaints. A few weeks later, I got another call from my mother. She was crying. She said my uncle's company might close. She asked whether I could reconsider. I told her I was sorry, but giving him money would not fix the underlying problem. She said I did not understand how bad things were. I told her that was exactly the problem. Nobody understood how bad things were because my uncle refused to show anyone the actual numbers. That night, I started looking into something I had never considered before. I remembered the name of the property services company that held his contract. It was not my uncle's customer directly. It was a larger company that hired local cleaning contractors. I searched for its business website. Then I looked at public corporate records. I did not find anything dramatic. The company appeared to be legitimate. It had several locations and thousands of employees. I looked at news articles, business filings, and public information about its ownership. Then I stopped. I felt ridiculous. I had no reason to be researching the company. I was not involved in my uncle's business. I closed my laptop. The next morning, though, I found myself thinking about it again. I had worked in operations for years. My job involved analyzing contracts, budgets, and vendor relationships. I knew enough about business to recognize that my uncle's biggest asset was probably not his trucks. It was the recurring contract. Without that contract, he had a handful of smaller clients and a pile of bills. That made me wonder whether the contract itself had any value, not to my uncle, to whoever controlled it. I did not have an answer. I decided not to involve myself. Then my uncle's company missed another payment. This time I heard about it because my grandmother mentioned that he had asked her to put a balance on her credit card. That was when I got angry. I called him. He answered immediately. I asked whether he was borrowing money from my grandmother. He said that was none of my business. I told him it became my business when an elderly family member was putting business expenses on a credit card to keep his company alive. He said she offered. I asked whether he intended to repay her. He said yes. I asked when. He said once the big contract paid. I asked when that would be. He said he did not know. That answer told me more than everything else. I asked him to send me his contract. He refused. I told him I was not asking for money anymore. I just wanted to understand why he was borrowing from the family. He said I had already decided he was irresponsible. I told him I had not decided anything. I just wanted the facts. He hung up. I felt guilty after the call. I wondered whether I was being too harsh. That night I thought about the years when my uncle had helped me. When I was younger, he had given me rides when my mother worked late. He had helped me move apartments. He had fixed the brakes on an old car I owned. He had been the uncle who always had tools. Part of me wondered whether I was letting one ugly argument erase everything good he had done. That was probably why I kept making excuses for him. A month later, he showed up at my house unexpectedly. He had a stack of papers in one hand. He said he wanted to prove that I had misunderstood. He sat at my kitchen table. The first few pages were invoices. Most of them were overdue. Some were for customers. Some were for supplies. Some were for payroll services. There was also a letter from his contract company. It said there had been repeated service failures and that his company was under a corrective action plan. That was the first time I saw the situation clearly. This was not one bad month. The contract was already in trouble. I asked him why he had told me the company just needed temporary cash. He said it did. He said the corrective action plan would go away once they had enough money to hire better workers and replace broken equipment. I asked how much he owed total. He said he did not know exactly. I started adding the numbers from the documents. Even with the papers he gave me, the total was well over $100,000. He got irritated when I kept asking questions. He said numbers looked worse on paper than they did in real life. I told him that was not how debt worked. He stood up. He said he knew what he was doing. I believed him less after that. Before he left, he asked me one more time for money. I said no. He told me I would regret turning my back on family. I told him I hoped he got the business under control. He said that was not the answer he wanted. I said it was the only answer I had. A couple of months passed. My uncle's biggest contract was terminated. I learned that from a cousin, not from him. The contract company hired another local contractor to handle the properties. My uncle's business started losing employees. Then his storage lease was canceled after he fell behind. He sold another van. He stopped answering family calls. My grandmother eventually admitted she had lent him $11,000. That caused a huge argument in the family. My mother blamed me for not helping because she said maybe the additional money would have kept my uncle afloat long enough to recover. I told her the company had already lost its largest source of revenue. She said I could not know that. I said the termination letter showed it. She asked how I had seen it. I said my uncle had shown it to me. The conversation ended badly. For several months, I had almost no relationship with my family. Then something unexpected happened at work. My employer announced that our company was acquiring a smaller regional business. The acquisition was my first exposure to the details of how these deals actually worked. I was not one of the executives making the decision, but I supported the operations team by reviewing vendor contracts and transition documents. I learned something important. A distressed company was not automatically worthless. Sometimes the valuable part was not the equipment, inventory, or cash. Sometimes it was the contracts. Sometimes it was the customer relationships. Sometimes the problem was poor management rather than a bad underlying business. That idea stayed in the back of my head. I began thinking about my uncle's old contract, not because I wanted to save him, because I wanted to understand what had actually happened. I found out which company had taken over the work. Then I searched public records for the company that had previously held the contract. The company was privately held. Its financial details were not public, but I found enough information to understand that its operations were much larger than my uncle's. I also found that the business had recently changed ownership. An investment group had purchased a majority interest in it. That got my attention. I had access through my professional network to a few people who worked in business acquisitions. I did not tell them about my uncle. I simply asked general questions about how someone might evaluate a service company that had a lot of recurring contracts, but poor performance from some subcontractors. The answer I got was that recurring service agreements could be extremely valuable if they were assignable, and if the customer relationships were stable. The person I spoke with also said distressed businesses sometimes became acquisition targets because larger operators could cut overhead and renegotiate obligations. That was the first time I realized my uncle might have been sitting on something valuable without understanding its value. I still had no intention of getting involved. Then my uncle filed for bankruptcy. That changed everything. I found out from my mother. She said he had finally admitted that his debts were much higher than anyone knew. He had used personal credit cards. He had several business loans. He owed vendors. He owed payroll-related taxes. He had outstanding vehicle payments. He had a personal guarantee on some of the business debt. My grandmother's $11,000 was at risk. My mother wanted me to help her figure out whether there was anything she could do. I told her to speak to an attorney. She said my uncle had already done that. I asked whether I could see the bankruptcy filing. She said she would ask him. A few days later, I found the filing through the public court records. I read it slowly. The total debt was far greater than I expected. The business had been losing money for more than a year. Some of the debts had existed before the major contract failed. My uncle had been using money from new jobs to cover old obligations. That was when I finally understood why every month had been called temporary. He was not temporarily short on cash. He had been postponing the collapse. I felt sick, not because I was responsible, because I had spent months wondering whether I had been too hard on him. The records showed that my refusal to lend him money had not caused the failure. The failure had been underway long before he called me. I called my mother and told her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she did not know. I told her I had not known either. That night I opened my financial accounts and looked at my own savings. I felt relieved. Then I felt guilty for feeling relieved. I knew my uncle was in a serious financial mess, but I also knew I had protected myself. A few weeks later, I received an email from someone I did not know. The sender worked for the investment group that had acquired the larger property services company. The email was completely professional. They were looking for potential acquisition candidates in the local commercial services market. They had heard about my employer and some of the operational work my team had done. They asked whether I knew of smaller service companies that might be available. I almost deleted the email. Then I thought about my uncle's former company. I did not own it. It was in bankruptcy. but I knew from the court records that its assets were being liquidated. I also knew the large property services company that had hired him had a replacement contractor. The old contract was gone. Still, the underlying business relationships, equipment, customer lists, and some smaller accounts had value. I replied to the email. I did not mention my uncle. I said I might know of a small commercial cleaning operation that was distressed and asked whether they were interested in reviewing it. They said yes. A few days later, I had a call with one of their acquisition managers. I gave them only public information at first. They reviewed the company's bankruptcy filing. They were interested. Their biggest question was whether any customer contracts were transferable. I told them I did not know. I then contacted the bankruptcy attorney handling the case. I explained that I had a potential buyer interested in purchasing certain business assets. The attorney said any sale would have to follow the court process. He also told me there were several liens and secured claims. I asked whether the company itself could be purchased. He said possibly, depending on what the court approved and which assets were included. I ended the call feeling strange. The acquisition group wanted to talk. I agreed. I told myself I was only exploring the idea. The first meeting was in a conference room at a small office building. I brought printed documents. The acquisition manager had a laptop open. We went through the bankruptcy filing. We reviewed equipment. We reviewed accounts receivable. We looked at the customer list. Then we reached the old major contract. That contract was no longer active, but the acquisition manager asked a question I had not thought to ask. He wanted to know whether the larger property services company had any reason to replace the replacement contractor in the future. I said I had no idea. He explained that property management companies often preferred reliable vendors with scale. He said if the relationship was handled correctly, there could be an opportunity to compete for similar work later. That was different from buying a failed company. It was buying a platform. A week later, they made an offer for a package of assets. The bankruptcy attorney accepted the offer for submission to the court. I had not told anyone in my family. I had not told my uncle. I did not know whether I was doing something smart or completely insane. I discussed the investment with my financial advisor. He warned me not to mix family and business. I told him I agreed. He asked why I was considering this. I explained that the numbers made sense independent of my relationship with my uncle. He said that was the only reason I should proceed. So I did. The court approved the asset sale. I became a minority investor in the new company alongside the investment group. We did not buy my uncle's personal debts. We did not assume his old liabilities. We bought specific assets and customer relationships that the court determined could be transferred. First few months were difficult. We had to replace equipment. We had to renegotiate vendor terms. We hired a bookkeeper. We had to establish new payroll systems. We brought in a manager who had experience with commercial service operations. And we focused heavily on compliance. Every invoice was tracked. Every payroll expense was documented. Every contract had to be reviewed. I stayed out of the daily operations. I was an investor, not a janitor and not a manager. Then, about 6 months after the acquisition, the company was bidding on a major commercial cleaning contract. It was not my uncle's old contract. It was a new contract with the same property services company. That was the first time I understood how strange the situation had become. The company that my uncle had blamed for ruining his business was now considering hiring the company I had invested in. The bid took weeks. We had to provide insurance certificates, financial records, staffing plans, references, background screening procedures, equipment inventories, and service guarantees. The property company did not care about my family drama. They cared about performance. We won the contract. It was profitable. Then we won another one, then another. The business stabilized. I still did not contact my uncle. I assumed he knew. Eventually, he did. I learned that when he called me one afternoon, I almost did not answer. He asked whether I was involved in the company that had purchased some of his old business assets. I said yes. He went silent. Then he asked whether I knew about the new contracts. I said I did. He said I had taken his business. I told him I had purchased assets through a court-approved process. He said I had waited until he was broke and then bought everything for cheap. I reminded him that anyone could have bid. He said I knew exactly what I was doing. I admitted that I had evaluated the opportunity carefully. He accused me of wanting to humiliate him. I told him I did not. He said I had no right to profit from his failure. I told him I had not profited from his failure. I had invested my own money into a struggling business and helped rebuild it. He said that was the same thing. I told him I was sorry he felt that way. He told me I should give him a job. I thought he was joking. He was not. He said he needed income. His bankruptcy had not erased every obligation. He had lost his house and was renting a small apartment. His credit was damaged. Several relatives had stopped lending him money. He said he had been applying for jobs, but employers wanted references. I asked why he wanted to work for me. He said he needed a paycheck. I told him I would consider him like any other applicant. He got angry. He said I was making him beg. I told him I was not. I said any employee would go through the hiring process. He said he was family. I said that was exactly why I needed to keep things professional. He hung up. A week later he applied. His application was solid. He had years of industry experience. The operations manager interviewed him. I was not in the room. The manager later told me my uncle was knowledgeable and understood the business. He also said there were concerns about his management history. I told him to follow the normal hiring process. My uncle was hired as a field supervisor. I did not give him a special salary. I did not give him a special title. He reported to the operations manager like everyone else. For the first few weeks, it was uncomfortable. People knew he was related to me. Some employees were nervous around him. My uncle seemed determined to prove he could still do the work. He arrived early. He worked hard. He solved problems. He was actually good at the operational side of the job. The problem was that he hated taking direction. He struggled with the new systems. He complained about paperwork. He complained about digital scheduling. He complained that every supply expense needed approval. Once he submitted an expense report for supplies that did not match the receipts. The manager sent it back. My uncle came to me. He said the company had become obsessed with small details. I told him the small details were how we stayed profitable. He asked whether I trusted him. I said trust was not the issue. The system applied to everyone. That became a recurring pattern. He wanted exceptions. We refused. He started telling relatives that I was treating him like a stranger. My mother called me again. She said I needed to be more compassionate. I asked whether compassion meant giving him authority over a company he did not own. She said that was not what she meant. I told her I was trying to give him something my uncle had never given me during the original conflict, a fair chance without special treatment. She admitted that made sense. Over time, things settled down. My uncle became one of our stronger field supervisors. He still complained. He still had a temper, but he was reliable. He started paying down his remaining debts. He rented a better apartment. He bought a used car. He eventually rebuilt enough credit to qualify for a normal lease without a cosigner. My grandmother got most of her money back through the bankruptcy process and what my uncle paid her over time. That mattered to me. The family stopped treating me like I had abandoned him. But one issue remained. My uncle never apologized. I did not need him to. Then one Friday evening, almost 2 years after the original phone call, he asked me to meet him after work. We sat in a diner parking lot because he said he did not want to have the conversation at the office. He admitted that he had been wrong about me. He said he had spent years thinking I had an easier life because I worked at a desk. He said he had been embarrassed that I had said no to the money because it made him feel like I no longer respected him. He admitted that the business had been in trouble for a long time. He had hidden it because he thought he could turn things around. He said every new loan felt temporary. Every missed payment felt temporary. Every employee problem felt temporary. He kept waiting for the one good month that would fix everything. It never came. I told him I understood. I also told him something I had never said before. I had not refused him because I thought I was better than him. I had refused because I knew enough about money to understand that throwing cash at a broken system was not rescue. He nodded. He said he understood that now. Then he laughed and said the strangest part was that he had once mocked me for being too good to clean up after other people. I told him I remembered. He said he deserved that one. We both laughed. It was not a magical reconciliation. Some things were still damaged. I still did not trust him with my finances. I still would not lend him money. I still kept family and business completely separate. But I stopped carrying the anger. That was probably the real ending for me. Not the company, not the contracts, not the fact that he eventually worked for a business I had helped buy. The real ending was realizing that I had spent so much time wondering whether I had been cruel when all I had done was set a boundary. I also learned that people can believe very strongly in a version of events that protects their pride. My uncle honestly believed I had looked down on him. He believed I had abandoned family. He believed the business failed because people refused to support him. It took court records, bank statements, contracts, and years of consequences before he could see what had actually happened. I could not have forced that realization. I could only refuse to participate in the fantasy. Looking back, there were warning signs everywhere. The calls from vendors, the borrowed money, the delayed payroll, the constant promises that everything would be fixed next month, the way he avoided showing his books, the way he turned every question about finances into a judgment about his character. I ignored some of those signs because he was family. I also made my own mistake by thinking that saying no was enough. I should have encouraged my grandmother to protect herself sooner. I should have urged my mother to stop covering for him. I should have realized that guilt was being used to keep everyone quiet. But I also know I did not cause his collapse. That matters. For a long time, I wondered whether refusing that $38,000 had been the moment everything fell apart. It was not. The records proved the company had been losing money long before that. My money would not have fixed it. It would have delayed it. And because I had written down every major conversation, kept every document my uncle gave me, and refused to make decisions under emotional pressure, I was able to understand that clearly later. The strangest part is that I never planned to own a cleaning company. I never planned to work with the investment group. I never planned to bid on commercial contracts. I definitely never planned to become my uncle's employer. Life just unfolded one practical decision at a time. I said no to a loan. I asked for documents. I read the bankruptcy filing. I learned how distressed businesses are valued. I looked at an opportunity. I invested cautiously. I followed the court process. I let professionals handle what required professionals. And eventually my uncle ended up working for the company that grew out of the business he had once told me I was too arrogant to understand. There was no movie-style revenge moment. I did not humiliate him in front of employees. I did not fire him because of our family history. I never reminded him that he needed me. In fact, during his first year as an employee, I made a point of doing the opposite. I stayed out of his way. I let the management team handle him. When he did good work, he got credit for it. When he made mistakes, he dealt with the same consequences as everyone else. That was probably the healthiest thing I could have done. The company continued growing. We eventually had enough recurring business to expand our office operations. We bought newer equipment. We increased wages. We added benefits. We started offering paid time off to supervisors who had been working as contractors for years. My uncle became part of that process. Ironically, some of the changes he once resisted ended up making his job much better. He now has a retirement account through the company. He has health insurance. He has predictable pay. He is not carrying payroll for 10 employees on his personal credit card. He does not wake up wondering which vendor will call first. He does not spend Sunday nights calculating whether he can make payroll. I think that alone changed him more than anything I said ever could. As for me, I still work at my original job. I still have my mortgage. I still compare prices at the grocery store. I still bring lunch to work. I still drive the same kind of practical car I had before all of this. Nothing about my daily life looks particularly successful from the outside. But I sleep better. I do not feel responsible for rescuing people anymore. That may sound cold, but it is actually the opposite. I learned that you can care about somebody without financing their mistakes. You can love family without signing yourself into debt. You can say no without hating somebody. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to help someone continue doing the thing that is destroying them. My uncle and I are on decent terms now. Not perfect, not like nothing happened, but decent. We have lunch occasionally. We talk about work. Sometimes he asks for my opinion on a business decision. Sometimes I give it. Sometimes I remind him that I am his nephew, not his financial advisor. He laughs when I say that. I think he knows why. My mother has also apologized. She told me she had confused keeping peace with doing the right thing. She said she had spent years trying to protect my uncle from the consequences of his choices. She eventually realized that in doing that, she was pushing the consequences onto everyone else. That was another lesson I did not expect. Family systems can become so focused on avoiding embarrassment that everyone starts carrying one person's problems. The person at the center of it sometimes never has to change because everybody else keeps cleaning up. I was not willing to be the next person holding the mop. That old joke from my uncle ended up meaning something completely different to me. For years, he had mocked me for being too good to clean up after him. The truth was that I was not too good to clean up. I was just finally willing to let him clean up his own mess. And somehow, without ever planning it, I ended up helping build something stronger from the pieces left behind. He ended up with a job. My grandmother got her money back. The company became profitable. The family stopped fighting over his debt, and I never had to hand over the $38,000. Every once in a while, I still think about that phone call at my desk. I remember looking at the number on my screen and wondering whether saying no would destroy my relationship with my uncle. At the time, I thought the choice was between being a good family member and protecting myself. It turned out there was another option. I could be honest. I could stay calm. I could ask questions. I could document what was happening. I could refuse to be pressured. And I could let reality do the arguing for me. The part I still find almost unbelievable is that when my uncle first told me I thought I was better than everyone, I spent weeks wondering whether he was right. Now I understand that feeling guilty does not necessarily mean you did something wrong. Sometimes it just means you disappointed somebody who expected you to say yes. And sometimes the person who gets angriest when you set a boundary is the person who benefited most from you never having one. I did not buy that company to get revenge on my uncle. I did not even buy it because of my uncle. I bought into it because the numbers eventually made sense. The court process allowed it, and I had enough documentation to know exactly what I was buying. The fact that my uncle later went to work there is just the strangest footnote in a story that started with him asking me for $38,000 at lunch. He once accused me of thinking I was too good to clean up after him. Years later, he was the one submitting supply receipts to a company I helped build, and I was the one telling the management team to treat him exactly like everybody else. No revenge, no humiliation, just paperwork, patience, and the consequences of being willing to say no when saying yes would have been easier.